Okay, I was legitimately not going to cosplay Kokomi, but then this happened. So now I have to. My first thought when I saw her was, she's beautiful, but what is that? But she's my first event 5-star, so I had to figure it out, because I had to cosplay her now. Having her in game did not change the fact that her design has some major pitfalls, like this strange loop, these patterns on the robe, and the way her hair just splits in two by itself. But despite all the challenges ahead, I was willing to suffer for our Grand Priestess, and I started where most of my cosplays start, a duct tape pattern. So Kokomi's underwear is super duper weird. It's difficult because it looks like everything is connected. The little bodice thing is connected to the shorts, and the shorts are connected to the socks. So fit is gonna be really crucial, and shape is gonna be really strange. Okay, I keep saying duct tape, but I'm actually using masking tape. But you need a roll of tape of some kind, and you need one other thing, and that is plastic wrap. You can just use the saran wrap from your kitchen, but I feel like I'm a big genius for getting this, but this is the kind that you get for packing boxes, and there's a ton of it, and I can like easily get it around me. Genius. Ow. Okay. That actually really hurt. Now, the trick is you do only need one side of this because the other side mirrors it. Tape my hair. So right now my plan is I'm going to pattern the top, then make a mock-up of the top, and then come back with said mock-up, do a duct tape pattern for the shorts while the mock-up is on my body so that I can know where the mock-up and the shorts need to meet. Okay, so now I'm all taped up. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start marking this up. So now I'm going to very carefully cut this off my body. I'm free. We did it! So now that I have this, I'm going to cut the pattern out as carefully as I can and transfer it to paper. So now that I have my pattern, I'm gonna make my first mock-up. If you don't know what a mock-up is, it's essentially just a practice round. So here's the mock-up. We're gonna pretend that I didn't mess this seam up, but it looks pretty good. I did do the back seam way too big, but that's an easy fix. Other than that, this looks good. I'm happy with this. This looks weird. Ignore that. I do think when I do the final, because this not only needs to support the bow, but it also sort of needs to support the robe, because the robe is like open and I'm probably gonna have to end up like putting snaps right here. I am gonna put boning right here and probably in the back, but I feel like the shape looks perfect. I'm actually so hyped for this. I was so worried that this was gonna be way too hard to figure out and I wasn't gonna be able to do it, or I was gonna have to like do this some other weird way. Anyway, now I'm going to make a duct tape pattern for the shorts. Now that I have this, I can mark where this relates to the shorts and we'll be on a roll for underwear. I made these a little too big. And then there is a little bit of bunching in the crotch, but my thought is that I'm gonna be making this out of a pretty well-structured fabric because, to put this delicately, we don't want any humpbacked carrier animals in some places with these shorts. So I'm gonna make sure that the fabric is thick enough to where it doesn't let that happen. So that'll help that. But I think the butt looks good. I think fit will be good. I think the scallops look good. I think where I cut it is where it should be. I think you're not seeing my belly button, but it does sit right under my belly button, which I wasn't sure if I was gonna do because I am a proponent that if there's a part of your body that you don't want to show, even if the character shows it, you don't have to show it. If you can see the character's belly button, but you want it higher cut, then have it higher cut. We make cosplay to fit our own body. We don't make our body fit cosplay. So I couldn't find a dull bridal satin in the exact shade of distinctively almost white lilac that Kokomi's underwear is in, but I do have on hand a bunch of white, so we're gonna cut the pieces out in white and then dye the pieces barely lilac. So update, I've done a couple things. I made the lining just in cotton, and then I used some lightweight fusible interfacing just to give it a little more structure. And then I added boning channels to each of these seams. I also made the fashion layer, or the outside layer. It's a little darker than maybe I would have wanted, but I think that's okay. And then I also went ahead and made the outside of the shorts and the lining for the shorts. The lining for the shorts is actually some white micro suede because, like I said, we want to avoid any humpbacked carrier animals in these shorts. So now we're at the point where the construction goes past what I did for the mock-up. So we're in new territory, and I think I'm gonna start with the shorts because the top is probably gonna be a pain. So the bottom half of the shorts is basically all scallops. Now, I've done a lot of scallops on cosplays before, and I'm happy that this only has like 8. If you were here for my Sagizo build or my Garuka build, you know I did like a million of them. Anyway, scallops are super easy, actually. First step is just marking the fabric. I actually lost all my marks in the dyeing process. Water-soluble pen. I'm dumb. I'm gonna put it right sides together with the lining. So now that these are pinned together, we can take it to the machine, and we're literally just gonna follow this line. I will say, at each corner, I like to do like one little stitch in the corner. It just helps turn out the scallops a little more. Pick up the needle, move the fabric, bring down again. Now we're at a corner, up, one extra stitch, move. So now that this is all stitched down, I'm going to take my pinking shears, which are just scissors with a little zigzag pattern instead of being straight. When you cut fabric zigzag like this, it helps it not to fray. But in this case, it's essentially cutting lots of little notches all right next to that curve, which is gonna help it curve. If you don't have any pinking shears, you can just go in with your scissors and carefully clip notches all the way over the scallops. And that will help. And I will go through and clip specifically on each corner, but for the most part, these help a ton. So now that these are scalloped and clipped, I'm just gonna do a straight stitch along the top, and then we can turn this right side out. Scallops won't really reach their full potential until you press them, but it is very beneficial to, by hand, work them out with your fingers first. So that way when you get to the iron, they're already like halfway there. So I tried it on, and it looked like a diaper. So the first thing I did was I took some of the side seam out, and I can just serge this edge, but I'm not gonna do that yet because this part is still a problem. And I'm thinking that if I turn this back inside out and reshape where the scallops are going, like into the crotch, I feel like this needs to be smaller, and that will cut down on the bunching. This already helped. I just gotta figure this out, and I might look up a couple other shorts patterns. I don't want it to look like a diaper, so we're gonna figure this out.
The shorts did end up looking better, but they don't take their final form until the bodice was made, so let's talk about that. I sewed the fashion fabric to the lining along the top and bottom edges, leaving the back seam open so I could turn it right side out. I gave that bubbly mess a zigzag stitch. Your sewing machine has 2 settings for zigzag stitches. Stitch width, together each stitch will be. If you turn your stitch length down low enough, it starts to form a solid applique, but it also has the property that it prevents fraying, so you can cut right up to it. Now my cuts weren't perfect here, so I got a little bit of fraying, but I'm actually only using the satin stitch to finish the edge because I'm covering it with our next over-explained sewing technique, a couching stitch. Couching is a technique used for lots of things, but in this case, I'm using it to attach yarn to create the swooping line details on Kokomi's bodice. You need a couching foot and obviously some yarn for this. The technique is actually really easy. The foot does most of the work for you. All you have to do is thread the yarn through the hole in the foot and set your sewing machine to a regular zigzag stitch. The foot holds the yarn in place, so now all you have to do is guide the fabric along the line you drew. I took the fabric from the top of the bodice and then around both the top and bottom of the loop to make it seem like the loop was like overlapping itself. See? I decided to go with couching for these lines because I already have in mind that this is how I'm going to do the line details on the fins. So having it on the bodice too will give the whole costume some visual cohesion. So getting these attached to each other was pretty weird, and I didn't really do it in the most professional way, but it seemed to work. First, I put them both on and pinned the front sides of the loop to where they sat on the shorts. Then on either side, I straight stitched on top of the couching stitch so that it ends up being hidden. With the front side now attached, I put them both on a second time, and in chalk, I marked where the back was hitting. Now this is the unprofessional thing. I cut the shorts pretty close to the front seam and then folded the little raw edge down, and then by hand sewing I secured that raw edge behind the bodice. Then I serged the back part of the cutout completely off, just following the chalk line I had made, and then once I knew where there's probably a better way to do this, and if you have any ideas, please share them in the comments for anyone else who attempts to make this set, but for mine, it worked okay. I did the same cut and fold over technique for the bottom sides of the loops too.
Let's talk about bows. So when most people start sewing, they make square bows. This is one of my only surviving square bows. This is one of the first dresses I ever made. You can see it looks like a bow, it acts like a bow, but it's really flat. It's not very lively. This is a loop bow. I learned how to make these from using the Cosmic Courtier bow tutorial. It's part of their Sailor Moon Fuku tutorial. You should definitely check them out because I believe this bow tutorial is actually still free, but they have a bunch of other tutorials on their Patreon. Loop bows are a couple extra steps. It's a little bit different of a pattern. This is what the pattern looks like. I've actually already cut my fashion fabric, my lining, and my interfacing, and I went ahead and did the satin stitching on the fashion fabric, so I'm ready to make these. Essentially, to make these, you make 2 loops instead of 1 square. Turn the loops right side out and sew the loops together at the center, gather them down, and then add the center knot. So for the knot, I am gonna dye this, but I cut this specifically on the bias. So stretchy here, not stretchy, not stretchy. The reason I did that is, you can see here with this one that's just cut on the straight grain, is when I fold it, gives me these weird bumpies. Don't want any bumpies. We're going bias. Once this is dyed, I will just sew it into a tube, stuff it with cotton batting, and it will make a cute little bow knot. Now, let's talk about socks. Specifically, extreme thigh highs. I'm talking thigh highs that stop like 2 inches below your crotch.
There's a tried and true method to keeping socks up, and it has nothing to do with tape or spirit gum. The secret is power mesh. Power mesh is a mesh spandex fabric that is usually used in like dancewear. So because of that, it comes in lots of different skin colors. Now, not every seller is going to have a very diverse shade range, unfortunately, but you can find power mesh in almost every skin tone, which makes it perfect for thigh highs like these. Because instead of letting the socks rule your life with tape and glue, we're gonna play sock god and we're gonna make them tights. Now you might ask, is this the same material as pantyhose? And no, I can't emphasize enough how much easier it is to work with power mesh than trying to sew anything to pantyhose. Pantyhose are made of nylon. They aren't even factory made with human hands. They are so hard to work with that we have specialty machines for them. So if factories use giant machines for them, there's no reason you should have to mess with them. Making the tights panel is super easy too. I have a generic legging pattern that fits the measurements of my leg. Here's a graphic on how you can get that for yourself if you can't find a commercial legging pattern, but it's pretty simple shape, and because it's all stretch, it's very forgiving. Anyway, you want to mark out where the sock is going to start and then cut the pattern in two. You'll end up cutting the sock portion out of 4-way stretch spandex and the top portion out of power mesh. Now welcome to the B-plot of this segment, which is me trying to get my sewing machine to stop skipping stitches on the spandex. When you work with stretch fabric, you want to use a zig. It wasn't until I picked up some ballpoint needles that are specifically made for stretch fabric that I was able to get the skipping to stop. You probably noticed that this first sock is white and that her socks are actually lilac, and that's because I did this one before remembering that I had to dye them.
I'm just gonna have to cut another one. I can't even get those apart. That's really fucking depressing.
So I made it again. So I pinned them within an inch of their lives, put Munchie on top to appease the stitch skipping gods, and then zigzagged right on top. Doing a traditional right sides together seam on scallops like this can be kind of difficult, so to compensate for that, I'm taking the easy route and I'm overlapping them by about an inch, and within that overlap, I'm doing a zigzag stitch to attach them together. This is gonna work for Kokomi because she has that little detail on top, and we're gonna use that detail to cover the external zigzag stitch. For the edge detail, I cut out 4 of this shape, sewed them right sides together, and then turned them right side out. There's a small cutout on the front of this shape, so to do that, I did a straight stitch where the edge of the cutout will end up, then cut the 4 corners of the cutout, folded them over to the back side, and then did another straight stitch on top to secure them. But before I could do that cutout on the sock itself, I needed to have the details attached entirely. So to attach the details, I did a lightning stitch around every edge of the detailing, including where the cutout will be. Once the detailing was completely on, I cut the 4 corners again, folded them over, and this time by hand sewing, attached those folds to the back side of the sock. It's crucial that all these details go on before the tights get sewn together, because it's much easier to work with a flat piece of fabric than it is a tube of fabric. Sewing tights together is really easy though. First, you sew together the curved crotch seams, then you unfold them, and you'll notice they kind of look like tights now. Then you just have to sew from toe to toe. Speaking of toes, Kokomi has traditional split toe or tabby socks? She has split toe socks. To make those toes split, I drew this foot-looking shape and stitched that in. Also, I seriously messed up one side by putting the toe on the wrong side. But through the power and forgiveness of stretch fabric, you can't really tell when they're on, even though there's an extra toe. To avoid that yourself, to learn from my mistakes, the big toe goes on the same side as the seam. The socks ended up being my absolute favorite part of this part of the costume. Okay, maybe the bow is my favorite, but I love the socks. I think the detailing looks really good. I think the toes look good, even though they're wrong. Originally, I was just going to wear them underneath the undergarments, but I ended up going in by hand and sewing the power mesh to just the lining of the shorts so that you can't see the stitches from the outside. Now I had my socks and my bow, but I still had to make my bow some weird fin things.
So I'm just gonna call these the curtains, these weird thin pieces that are part of the bow. I haven't really thought about how I was going to do them until now, but I'm thinking I'm going to do them in the same way I'm planning on doing most of the robe. I'm doing most of the robe in layers of bridal satin and organza because I want to look like a fish. So this will be a good test run to see if I like how these fabrics really combine together on a single piece, and it'll also have this really cool like color shifty effect right at the center front of the costume, and I think that's going to be really cool. Ooh, I love it. This bodes so well for what I'm thinking I'm going to do for the robe. I'm really excited. When in the sunlight, the color shift is so predominant. It's going to be so cool to wear it at cons and have just the light bouncing everywhere. I'm so happy with this. Overall, I'm really happy with how this set turned out, and while I'm really excited to make her sleeves, this part of the costume came out really cute and very comfortable. We succeeded in not having a diaper or a carrier animal anywhere, though I still have no idea what this is. If you have any idea, please tell me. The wig video is coming out very soon, so subscribe or maybe hit the notification bell so that you know when it comes out. I am working on the kimono now, and it's getting a video too, but that will take a hot minute probably. But anyway, thanks for watching. So I had to figure out what it was. I still don't know what it is, because I had her now. I can't not cosplay her. Right? Right?